Order, order. I call on Lloyd Russell-Moyle to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered the treatment of Kurds in Turkey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to speak on this. As the Vice Chair of the APPG for Kurds in Turkey, I wanted to bring this debate forward to highlight what I believe to be a worsening situation for Kurds in Turkey. On the 31st of February, I, along with my honourable friends, the member for Enfield Southgate, Edmonton and Horsey and Wood Green, were meant to travel to Turkey to meet Leyla Guven and observe the local elections taking place in Turkey. Unfortunately, the government announced extra days of sitting due to Brexit. I suspect something that not even the government could have helped at that particular time, and we had to cancel the trip. But my honourable friend from Enfield Southgate and I did travel down to Newport to meet with Imam Sis. Imam is a brave Kurdish activist from Newport who 114 days ago embarked on an indefinite hunger strike. 2 weeks ago, when we met him, the hunger strike was taking its toll on him. But although his body was giving way, his determination for the cause of Kurdish freedom was not.
Will my friend give way?
I will do.
As my honourable friend has alluded to, I visited Imam Sis in Newport with him, and what struck me most was Imam's plea for the world not to look on silence at the human rights abuses against the Kurds in Turkey. Deciding to go on an indefinite hunger strike for one's political cause is one of the hardest decisions and most drastic, peaceful political actions that one can make. So would he agree with me that this Parliament and this government must not stay silent about human rights abuses against Kurds while British citizens are risking their lives for the Kurdish political cause?
I totally agree. We must speak up, and I hope that we will get some good responses from the front bench later on. I will do. Yeah.
Giving way. Just for the record, and first of all, congratulate the honourable gentleman on bringing it forward, and it's good to see it being debated and discussed in this chamber. I support the Kurds and their right to self-determination and for the right to be a nation and form their own government. Alongside that, we have Turkey, an abuser of human rights, a suppressor of civil rights. Religious and ethnic groups are having their beliefs restricted. The new churches are being prevented from being built. Is it not time that the free world, the West, the Minister, this government, ourselves, stood alongside the Kurds, backed their wish for democracy and freedom, and indeed for liberty itself?
Thank you. I totally agree. And it is, of course, the case that Britain historically has been part of drawing these lines on maps that exterminated a Kurdish nation. And we, therefore, have responsibility to make sure that we are adding our voice for correcting an historical wrong in terms of on the map, but also recognising the role that the Kurds have played in allying with us in numerous battles, particularly the latest one against ISIS.
I was on from that point. I also congratulate him for securing this debate, and to also echo the comment that he just made. It is fact that the West, as it were, and the wider world has let down the Kurdish peoples, particularly after the First World War, and yet again when we've seen them help the rest of the world, when most recently in Syria against ISIS, again we're at danger of once again turning our backs on them, and it must not happen.
I totally agree. And I should, of course, mention here that my honourable friend, the member for Newport East, is the local member for Imam Sis, and she's been an advocate for his struggle, but can't be here today because of the death of her agent last week, and she's at his funeral. So she is following this with great interest. Mr. Chairman, I asked Imam, when I was with him, to write down the key demands that he wanted to be raised in Parliament. So today here I am partly putting Imam's voice on Hansard, and so we get a response. He wrote to me saying, the hunger strikers are demanding that Turkey ends the isolation of Abdullah Öcalan, namely We are demanding that Öcalan be returned access to his lawyers and families. In not doing so, Turkey is breaking international law and its own laws. The hunger strikers are also asking for the Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture to reopen its investigation into the conditions on Imrali Island where Öcalan is being held. I will do, the Honourable Lady.
I'm very grateful, and I too congratulate him for securing this debate. And I'm sure he will agree with me that what we have noticed as a pattern with Turkey is that there is international attention, that something that Abdullah Öcalan gets to meet, say, his lawyer briefly or his brother briefly, then the attention of the world retreats and nothing further happens, that it is essential for us to keep the pressure on and that we would call on the government to ensure that it's not just a superficial, tokenistic response on the part of the Turkish government.
I totally agree. And since 2015, very few, if any, access was granted to Abdullah Öcalan, and it is only because of some of the hunger strikes and some of the campaigning that brief interventions have been allowed for relatives to make sure that he is still alive. He was allowed no access to the external world, and his lawyer has had no access in that time.
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend for giving way. Would he, like me, praise the trade union movement in the UK for highlighting this issue as part of the Freedom for Öcalan campaign? And is he, like me, concerned that there are 700 appeals being lodged on behalf of Mr Öcalan, and he has said that lawyers aren't getting access to it?
I totally agree, and of course this last year just gone, the Durham miners' strike was themed with its international theme for freedom for Öcalan, and I think it shows, just like with many other struggles that we've had in the past, where the trade union movement is stepping up to fight for what is just and right. But, Mr Chairman, for the benefit of those watching proceedings who may not be aware of Abdullah Öcalan, he is the Kurdish leader and political philosopher who is currently imprisoned in Turkey. Last Thursday was his 70th birthday, but for 20 years of his life he has been held in prison by the Turkish authorities. Öcalan was abducted from Nairobi, Kenya, where he was in exile and this happened on February 1999, and it was an international clandestine operation involving intelligence agencies of Turkey. He was transported to the island prison where he has been kept in harsh solitary confinement. He has been forbidden to contact his lawyer since 2011, and I met his lawyer a month ago, and he has only been granted access to anyone twice since 2015. The conditions in which he is held violate not only Turkish law, but the European Convention on Human Rights, which Turkey is obliged to follow as a member of the Council of Europe. In order to protest these unlawful conditions, the then imprisoned MP for the HDP, the People's Democratic Party, Leyla Güven, began an indefinite hunger strike on the 7th of November. Leyla was imprisoned by the Turkish authorities following her critical remark on the government's bombing of Afrin in northern Syria, which, quite rightly, she described with detest. She was a sitting MP, thrown in prison for doing her job, holding the government to account. She was released 80 days later, but now after almost 140 days is nearing death, suffering from nausea, fever, severe headaches, insomnia and unstable blood pressure. And we have seen a set of elections in Turkey which I think are beyond anyone being able to call them fair and free, particularly in some of the Kurdish regions. Leyla in Turkey and Imam here in the UK are not alone in their hunger strike. Since the end of last year, they have been joined by 8,000 political prisoners from across Turkey, and numerous activists in Europe, North America and the Middle East have all joined Ms Güven in declaring indefinite hunger strike. Many hunger strikers are now suffering from serious health problems but refuse medical treatment until the isolation of Öcalan is lifted. Mr Chairman, we are joined in the public gallery by 3 hunger strikers based here in London. They are, and excuse me for my pronunciation, I will probably get it wrong, Ali Poyraz, Nahida Zengin, Mehmet Said Yelmaz, who are on their 26th day, I think, 27th day of hunger strike. It is an awful position to find yourself in, feeling that it is your only recourse to political voice. but I welcome them to Parliament today, and I know that they will have many MPs in this place that, whilst not be joining them on their methods, will be sympathetic and supporting their demands. Mr. Chairman, the human rights situation in Turkey is progressively deteriorating since the breakdown of talks in the peaceful resolution for a decades-long conflict between the Kurds and Turkish state in 2015, at which point the Turkish state began engaging in a policy of brutal repression against the Kurdish population, imposing harsh 24-hour curfews along the southeastern Kurdish region and committing countless human rights abuses. And all this after Öcalan had spurned violence for peaceful political resolution. And converting, we know in Britain, converting a violence to peaceful protest is not an easy road. It requires good faith and perseverance on all sides. But the fact is, Turkey's continued repression of Öcalan's and the Kurds destroys any potential for a peaceful resolution for the Kurds and Turkey as a whole. The situation was greatly exacerbated by the state of emergency, which of course followed the failed coup in 2016, under which political opposition and trade union activity has been largely banned, alongside the removal of office of democratically elected politicians and members of parliament, and members of the judiciary, on the grounds of suspected affiliation with opposition activity, and always replacing them with President Erdogan's AKP puppets. The Council of Europe's Committee on the Prevention of Torture has visited the notorious island where Öcalan is held, Imrali, and other political prisoners, 7 times since 1999. Very few of the improvements they have called for have ever been implemented. The CPT's last visit to the island was 2016, and Turkey only gave permission for the publication of its report in 2018, 2 years later. The hunger strikers are demanding that the CPT be allowed to revisit Imrali Island prison immediately and investigate the conditions of the prisoners there to see if any of the improvements have been made. Mr. Chairman, I have been disappointed by the reaction of the growing concern. In January 2019, the Council of Europe passed the resolution, a resolution expressing concern regarding the human rights situations in Turkey and the condition of the hunger strikers, as well as calling Turkey to authorise the immediate publication of the CPT's reports. However, the resolution has been insignificant to pressure Turkey to change its ways. The hunger strikers are calling for all possible pressure to be put on Turkey to end the isolation of Öcalan before the situation escalates and there are mass casualties. So, Mr. Chairman, can I ask the Minister today what recent discussions has he had, or has the Foreign Office had, because I am aware that he's not the Minister for the Middle East and he's covering, what discussions he or his department has had with counterparts in Turkey on the treatment of Kurdish prisoners in Turkey, and in particular on the conditions in Imrali Island. Will he seek assurances from the Turkish authorities that Öcalan is granted access to his lawyer in compliance with Turkish law and international law? Will he, as a matter of urgency, seek to have the Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture reopen their investigation into Imrali Island? And will the government support the Welsh Assembly's referral to the CPT on this matter so that it has the backing of the whole of the British state? Will we ensure that our member of the CPT is raising this issue in those committee meetings? Turkey is a NATO ally, but we must not allow a friendship to stop us from demanding fair and just treatment of all citizens. We have seen in Northern Ireland and other parts of the world that we only achieve lasting peace if political leaders on all sides are given legitimacy, respect, and a seat at the table to forge peace. The British government must stand with the Kurdish peoples. As I've mentioned already, we have an historic duty as well as a current humanitarian moral duty to do so, so that we seek, and they seek, peace that they desperately deserve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.